Think she's lost interest? She didn't. She's bored because you're missing the things that women respond to. Today, we are breaking that down. This episode is about understanding where men go wrong and what they can do instead if they want deeper connection and pleasure with their partner. My guest today will help you with actionable changes that will shift pleasure for both of you. Annette Benedetti is the host of Talk Sex with Annette podcast. She's a writer, she's an intimacy coach, and she's been helping people find their voice and their power through pleasure for over a decade. She's a queer woman, a sexual assault survivor, a coach, and a mother who is committed to developing trauma-informed methods for navigating desire, identity, and healing at every stage of life. Her refreshingly honest and body-literate approach to empowerment through pleasure allows her to speak the truth to power and advocate for women, queer folks, survivors, and the men who want to love them better. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
I'm so excited to actually meet you in person. We've had a couple of emails, but a little technical difficulties, but we're finally here together. Yeah. So I'm going to the expert today to help both men and women understand how to have more pleasure from their sex lives and just life in general. As we know, better sex makes for a better life. So what do your female clients privately tell you about what they wish their male partners would do? What is so disappointing about their experiences?
I think that the thing that men don't understand is that sex can very easily become like work for women. We all know, hopefully at this point, about the orgasm gap. But if your listeners don't know about the orgasm gap, it's merely the gap between how often a woman orgasms versus how often their male counterpart orgasms. We're talking about obviously heterosexual relationships here during sex. And, there are all different types of stats, but basically from penetrative sex alone, I think it's something like only 18% of women can come or orgasm from penetrative sex alone. Whereas I can't even remember what the stat is on men. It's in the 90%, mid 90 percentage or percent of men can orgasm from penetrative sex alone. So women who are engaging in sex with partners where penetration is the primary point, the whole big focus of sex, are not experiencing pleasure. So when you are doing an act like that and you aren't getting pleasure out of it or orgasming, and the orgasm isn't the only kind of pleasure you get out of sex. But if you're having the kind of sex where someone crawls on top of you, penetrates you, and orgasms, then you start to feel like that act is something that's being done to you or something you're doing for someone else. And it's not something that you are doing together that's pleasureful, where the payoff makes it worthwhile. If the payoff doesn't make it worthwhile, it's work, right? So women feel like sex is work.
Do women always feel it's work, or is that something that happens over time in relationships?
That depends on how things start out, right? And also, we need to talk about generational indoctrination, if you will, into relationships. So I would say oftentimes, especially for women going through midlife right now, we were really taught that sex was a way in which we found our partner and pleasured our partner. And it was more of what we did as our part of a relationship. And I'm talking about heterosexual relationship, now. Sex was very performative for a lot of people in Gen X generation and above, and some millennials. I mean, pleasure education when it comes to sex wasn't a thing. And to reach an orgasm for a man, you don't need a lot of pleasure education because our sex education in the United States, at least, is really all about reproduction. In order to reproduce, a man needs to reach orgasm. So we were taught how to make sure that happens. But what we weren't taught was how to make sure a woman is experiencing pleasure during sex. So that education wasn't there. So for our generation, I'm going to say our because I'm assuming you're in Generation X.
I think I'm a little older than you, but I'm actually a baby boomer.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yeah,
Well, and then
I'm
we've
at the
got
tail end.
and then we've got the older millennials who also sort of were indoctrinated into this, please him as a woman sort of sex trap. For many of us, it's always felt like work to some extent because we didn't know how to have our own pleasure. But maybe we got pleasure out of the appreciation we received or the awe in which, he treated us with, or, the compliments, the attention, right? And then some of us just were in the 18% orgasmic, yeah, it was fun. We hopped on top and we also had an orgasm. So for some people, it didn't necessarily start out all as work or feeling like work. And maybe in the beginning of relationships, all of us can harken back to the beginning of our relationships, even when we're really excited, but we're nervous enough that even if we know how to make ourselves have an orgasm, you aren't having necessarily as many orgasms because you're nervous or, you're learning your new partner, but it doesn't feel like work because it's exciting. And because you guys are doing all of those sexy, exciting things that make it pay off, right? Make intimacy is a big payoff. It's something fun to do together. You're exploring each other, and there's a lot of pleasure in that, right? So in the beginning, it can start off as play, as exploration, as romance. You get kind of that high off of the connection, right? And in the beginning, oftentimes intimacy is woven throughout the day. I would say sex, depending on how you define it, is woven throughout the day. You wake up to your new lover, you roll over and caress their body, kiss them on their shoulder, their neck, their ear, maybe touch their breasts or, grab their crotch and in a joking way before you get out of bed and make some joke. I would call that sex. I would call that foreplay. Foreplay is part of sex. And even if you don't go any further than that, you've already had a little sex in the morning, right? And then maybe midday you send a sexy note or just I was thinking about you because I really appreciate how you do this. Or you go to the bathroom at work and you take pictures of your tits and you send it to your partner. Again, you're having sex there. That is, think about it. If you caught your partner sending their tits to someone else, you'd consider it sexting. That is sex, right? You've had sex again throughout the day. Then you come home from work and maybe, you make out and you rub each other's back and you've got that intimate touch happening. Again, that's like a lead up. It's foreplay. You're weaving sex throughout the day. Now, when you get later on in relationships, you wake up in the morning, you roll out of bed, you hit the alarm, you roll out of bed, your partner's snoring next to you. You've forgotten how to appreciate that. I get to lay here next to this person naked. And how lucky am I? In my current situation, I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I get to wake up to boobs. And I make sure that I make contact with them before I leave.
Love it.
Right. And we joke about it. She thinks it's really funny. But that, the thing that happens is down the line, oftentimes we start to take each other for granted.
Yeah.
And we let those things go. And then what happens is sex becomes compartmentalized. It's this thing that happens after the day is done, after you've worked all day, after you've gotten done arguing about who did the dishes or didn't. And then it's 9:00, it's been a week, and they're like, hey, are we going to
Yeah.
And the woman in her mind is like, I just went to work. I worked all day. I got home and I cleaned. I put the kids to bed. I helped them with homework. And now you want me to lay down in bed and try and get you off? What's the payoff, right? You've lost that connection. You've lost that fun. And that happens in a lot of relationships.
So how does it differ in lesbian couples?
Well, I think that this is a universal thing. There's something that's often referred to as lesbian deathbed, right? Yes. Now, understand, I am a queer woman. I'm bisexual, pansexual. I date people of all gender. I've dated many men. I date women. And I really think as far as this goes, the taking for granted, the losing the romance throughout the day, that can happen with any couple at all. The difference, though, when it comes to having sex with a woman and having a sex with a man is the way we have sex, right? So for women, way less often, the orgasm, penetrative sex is not the focus. Sex doesn't begin when something goes inside of you, right? Because we don't focus on one gender's orgasm as the beginning and the end. When a man orgasms, oftentimes that's the end of the show.
Right.
Oftentimes he's rolling over and going to sleep. And with two women together, there's not like one person's orgasm that signals we're done. In fact, like sometimes it's like, I think we have to finish because I need sleep tonight, right? Because it can really just
Yeah.
go on and go on and go on until you decide, I want it to be done. So that's where it differs, is we're not looking at one gender's orgasm dictating everybody's pleasure. If you've got two people with vulvas having sex together, then we're looking at, have we both had pleasure more so? And what kind of pleasure do we both like, right? So for instance, when I'm topping, maybe when I'm topping a woman and she's in more of the bottom position, I really enjoy the energetic orgasm where I may just want to be giving during that. And I'm going to really get off on that, and having her come is what gets me off, right? And so maybe then it's done when she comes, or I'm like, okay, I want to give you a different kind of orgasm. Now roll over. I want to, have you orgasm from this and be in control. That's sort of what I'm going to get off on. I don't need necessarily any touch, but we both know what's going to get each other off. And we both know when each one of us is satisfied. I think that if you're looking at traditional heterosexual relationships, we aren't often having those conversations. Because it's really taboo.
Yeah.
And it's really shamed, the idea of stepping outside of like conventional vanilla sex, which is really, you make out a little, maybe you touch each other's genitals. I mean, in the beginning, like even oral sex wasn't, unless a man was receiving, was considered taboo, right? And then penetration happens and then you're done. And so exploring outside of that, little small box of how it's supposed to happen, there's a lot of shame attached to that, especially for women who are very heterosexual. I say very because there's a lot of heteroflexibility out there, right? But when you're looking at queer women, just our state of being is taboo. We've already stepped outside of the box. So it's a little bit easier to be like, all right, well, why not talk about this or try that, right? I mean, we've already battled a lot of shame. I think that shame is a big barrier in heterosexual sex, right? There's a lot of unsaid desires, unspoken desires. There's also the manosphere out there that is telling men that women who want certain kinds of sex, who want to be sexual in certain ways, are lower in value. But the same people that are men that are watching these podcasters out there and listening to them, that's their fantasy, but they want to have that kind of sex. They want to have exploratory sex. They want to have, adventurous sex with a partner. So there's that dissonance. There's that conflict. I want this thing, but then if she offers it, she's less valuable. She's already dirty. She's not, And so there's a lot of that education going on out there. That's coming into the bedroom, and that's making a bad situation worse, right?
Right. And it's also she's ashamed if she wants it. It's like okay, I'm enjoying this, but it's not okay because I'm not supposed to be enjoying it because that's not that's not the script I was taught. It's supposed to be my role, not my joy.
Exactly. And women who are still in that model of competing for a guy, or in sort of a male-centered way of existing in the world. They're wanting to please these men and be picked by these men who are saying, oh, if you, what is it called when they're like, if your body count, if a woman's body count is whatever the number they come up with, it means bad things about her. They're like, oh, but see, I haven't had sex with that many people, and that makes me better. But then they have to hold that status to feel better than another woman, which means they aren't exploring their own bodies, their own pleasure, their own wants and needs, right? They're not discovering what turns them on. And they bring that into the bedroom. And I will tell you this, we focused on why women are unhappy about sex and what their complaints are about sex. But I think even or as important, I'm going to say as important to this conversation, but more interesting, I think, perhaps to the fixing the problem is what are men complaining about when it comes to sex? Because most of the men that reach out to me are like, how do I get her? She'll have sex with me, but she doesn't desire it. I want to feel desired. She's kind of going through the motions. And then if a man is like, and I kind of want to try a little spanking, or I want to try, a little something taboo, they don't know how to bring it up to her, or they try to bring it up to her and she shuts down. Well, we just talked about why she's shutting down. Well, because what if I do that? And then suddenly he's like, oh, you're a dirty, you're, whatever, calling her devalued. So now you've got this situation. You've got men who want to feel desired. They want a woman to crave them. They want the same things we're seeing in romance movies or, whatever, Braveheart, what I'm talking about, where the guy has the woman that's just passionately coming together and they're having the sex. They want that. But we're in a place and time in history where it's like, all right, well, something's going to have to give if you want that, right? You can't have that, but continue what we've been doing, which is shaming women for wanting sex and seeking it out and exploring it and devaluing them based on that, right? And then we have to figure out how to bring sex out of the shadows, where it's compartmentalized to the evening, to the night, to the darkness. And we're weaving it throughout the day, which means expanding the definition of what sex is, right? So
I love what Esther Perel says. Sex begins at the end of the last orgasm.
100% and I would say that's aftercare, right?
Yeah.
That's aftercare. One of my favorite things to do after sex is to go and I get a warm washcloth or a warm towel, and I love to like wipe my partner's body down just so that their system comes down, and then to get them a dry towel to put over, whether it's their genitals or whatever, because usually we're covered in lube, hopefully, regardless of who you're having sex with and the gender. I hope you're all covered in lube.
Lots of slipperiness.
Right.
Like that.
So, afterwards you're kind of, I don't know, I have some sensory issues. So I'm laying there going sticky. Oh, I can't relax. So get that warm towel and to like do this like little worship ritual. And sometimes like I'll go and get us both tea if we're still usually, we're both kind of revved up. Now, I know that for some men, in that aftermath of the orgasm, why am I forgetting the word? The refractory period for men can be really intense and they want to go to sleep. This is where things can get tricky for guys who like go into sleep mode after orgasm, because it's really important that you figure out how to elongate that little, because aftercare, as we just pointed out, Esther Perel, who I think can all agree is a guru in this area a little bit. This is a period of time that is so important not to miss. It's going to set you up for your intimacy moving forward. And if you roll over and go to sleep and leave her lying there alone in the aftermath, that is where that thought comes in, like, this sucks. This feels like work. I could have just masturbated by myself, right? So whatever that means for you, do you need to have a chocolate next to bed that you like pop in your mouth so you kind of come alive, or a cold glass of water? Do you need to make sure you're the one that gets up and goes and gets the washcloth and you wash the lube off her body so she can sleep in peace and you get a little bit more of that yummy, sexy connection time? And then you roll over and big spoon her so she feels enveloped and adored. I mean, it doesn't have, I'm not talking about, a half hour. I'm talking about 10 to 15 minutes of connection, helping her come down. Oftentimes women after they orgasm are up in this heightened state, right? Our heartbeats are going fast. Our nervous system is lit up in really good ways. We're getting that dump of endorphins and oxytocin, right? We're like, I want to talk now. let's talk, right? And guys are like, oh, Jesus, right? So that period of time is something to really quote problem solve and turn into like sweetness for the both of you. Your motivation is she's going to want sex again sooner because she's going to want that. We love that sweetness. Sometimes I love it so much, like I'm down to have sex just to get to the aftercare, right? I love that tea and like sometimes, I'll go and get a little dessert or whatever time in bed. I love that. So,
And then the next morning, if it was really that great, remind her because there's
yeah,
nothing sexier than, ooh, remember last night? Yeah, I love that. I love
yeah,
that. So there's a lot to unpack here, but there's two components that I would love you to help address. You talk about men, and I really believe, I think men want to please, they don't know how, they don't have the language. It's I think men do this too, but I think women especially, he should know. He should know what I'm thinking. He should know what I want. And I remember having this conversation with a dating coach that I hired, I don't know, many years ago. And I was complaining about something, the text messages, how they kept going flat. And she's like, well, did you ask, like, did you ask them? I'm like, well, shouldn't they know what to ask me? She's like, no, men, she was a little more derogatory, but I would say like men just haven't been taught, they've been taught one thing about sex. So now we're going to teach them and their female counterparts how to receive it. Because if he decides today he's got the new language that we're going to talk about now that Annette recommends, and then she just laughs him off, that's not going to fly either. So we both have a role in this. But let's start with the understanding, like, what are some of the communication tips that you can give men to help initiate these better, conversations with their female partners and to have better sex, and then maybe go into a little bit more about the physical, literally what happens and why we need what we need or how we need it in a certain way, just as an educator.
right. So I guess we'll start with communication because communication has to happen. So whether you are in a new relationship or one that you've been in for a while and your intimacy is struggling, communication has to happen if you want to move it in a positive direction. I mean, it's optimal if you have these conversations at the beginning of a relationship, but for, people who are older and are in longer term relationships, just because you didn't set yourself up in the beginning doesn't mean you can't change things now. But talking has to happen. And those conversations can be really hard, right? There's a lot of fear. If I talk about my wants and needs, what will they think of me? But this is where you have to get brave, right? But the other thing you have to do is also be ready to go into those conversations with an open mind, meaning you have to be prepared to hear what your partner wants and needs without judgment. And I think that the first and easiest thing to do is just say to your partner, hey, I want to take some time, whether it's tonight or I want to take you on a date to dinner, somewhere where there's some privacy, or have like a dinner tonight at home. I want to set up some time and space for us to talk about our intimate life, sex, like what we both want from it. Because if you're new in a relationship, you can just be like, hey, I want to make sure that you're satisfied and that we get to do all the fun things together. You can make it a really fun conversation. If you've been struggling, you can just say, like, I feel distance from you, and I want to make sure that we both have a pleasure-filled marriage or partnership, but I want to sit down and talk about it. And then I think the next important thing is to go in the conversation without blame. This isn't like, you never want me, you never want to do this. I notice that we don't have sex often. I know that we both have been together a long time. Life has been rough or busy. We've been through a lot of changes, but I'm ready to reconnect with you. And I want to figure out how we can do that, right? So it's not blaming. It's like, here's our situation and I want you. Can we talk about how that can happen? So don't set someone on the defense. This shouldn't become a blame game. Because trust me, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, you both are going to have ammunition and be able to blame each other for things that
Yes.
you don't
Yes.
need to do that, right?
Yes.
If you don't want to hear, I've been faking orgasm for the last 10 years with you. Like
Yeah.
some things we don't need to like know. Um, and then you start the conversation like, I want to bring our sex life back to life. Here's what was really exciting in the beginning. One of the things that I do with my clients is I always start with, well, let's go back to when it was working. Or let's go back to, look, if you're like, well, it's never really working, then let's go back to a time when you feel like you had amazing sex. What was it about that time that made it amazing? Let's start recreating that. And then simultaneously, we got to take sex out of the compartmentalized nighttime bedroom routine and figure out, well, like, how can we weave it throughout our day? And that means looking at the definition of sex differently. Now, the way a lot of coaches will approach this is like, they'll do the whole take sex off the table for whatever a month and just practice touching without sex. I don't like that approach. It again separates sex out as this thing that you've put in a box and compartmentalized. Instead, let's broaden the definition of sex. Let's say that when I wake up in the morning and I run my hands over your breasts and hug you and tell you how sexy you are and how much I'm so grateful that I get to touch your body this morning, that's sex. How about we decide that is sex? We had a little sex this morning. How about I send you a couple of texts throughout the day talking about the little sexy things I've thought about you and we've sexted. That's also sex. Let's talk about how we can start weaving that intimacy in throughout the day. And if she needs a break on the penetrative part of sex, meaning your and her, fine, then maybe we find other ways to pleasure each other until she's like, I'm ready to hop on that, right? We can always leave penetrative sex on the table. There's always an invitation to ask me to penetrate you, right? It's an invitation, right?
Right.
But let's find other ways to like play. Let's find a way to be in bed for like 3 hours and pleasure each other without to penetration. It could be fingers, it could be oral sex, it could be toys. I can watch you, you can watch me. We can watch a sexy TV show and touch each other at the fun parts. You know what I mean? Let's find other ways to do it.
I call those sex snacks. The little things that you do during the day, the sexting, the comments, the little touches. And then I would also add, that's great advice. I would also add trying to not take your clothes off, just to sit there and try, because the more you can't do it, the more interested you're going to be in having
In
it.
doing it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I always suggest, and when I'm working with couples, this is one of the first things we start doing, is that each person takes ownership of their own pleasure and their own sexual journey. I believe each person should have their own self-pleasure journey that they're on. I think everybody should be able to bring their own body's pleasure and take care of that need, the need, right? We should want each other, but we should never feel like our partner can take that away from us, right? You hear men say a lot, well, women control men with sex. Well, if you're taking care of your own needs, if you know how to experience pleasure and satisfy your own self and keep that cup full, she's not going to control you with that at all, right? She's just going to be someone that you can enjoy it together with. And the same with women. I think the payoff of the self-pleasure practice for women is a little bit different. Women need to learn how to find pleasure and experience pleasure in bed. We aren't taught that. Sex education has nothing to do with that. Most of us don't even know that the clitoris from the G spot, from the A spot, from the, all of the P spot and a clitoral from a blended, from rolling orgasms. Like most of us don't know any of that. So our self-pleasure journey is really learning our bodies. And I'm not saying that a man's or a person with a penis's self-pleasure journey doesn't also teach them about their body, because I'm sure that there are a lot of things to learn. So for a man, you can explore different parts of your body, your penis, different ways to self-pleasure it. You can also explore with yourself and your the men's G spot, if you will, the P spot, right? But I think that that's really important too.
And it's something you can teach your partner. I mean, it can be kind of a cross pollination, right? Which would be the
Absolutely.
best case scenario. I want to just digress for a minute because as I understand how you got into this work had something to do with self-pleasure. So I would love that story inserted here because I think it would be a really great way to help women understand what you're really talking about here.
Right, absolutely. In 2022, on January 1st, I decided to do a 365 days of orgasms challenge where I had one orgasm a day for a full year. And I accomplished it. And it was so hard.
Well, I
But
could believe it.
I was I really made that. It was a alcohol fueled coming off a great night of sex declaration I made. So and I made it to the whole world via my podcast, Talk Sex with Annette, and social media. And then I felt like I needed to stick with it. But it ended up being an amazing journey that taught me so much about myself and opened doors to not only pleasure but power and healing. So many things happened over the course of that year. I had no idea how powerful my own sexuality and my own pleasure was, and how powerful in my everyday life it would become. And one of the things I learned from that journey too was how effective sexually shaming women is as a tool of oppression.
Wow.
Because as I regained my own sexual power, sexual energy, my access to pleasure um, back as I regained sort of the thing that had been oppressed. All areas of my life started to bloom and grow. My whole life and how I walked through this world started to change. So it also has served as a tool in relationships with others, right? Now, when I have sex with someone, I can tell them how I get off, what I get off on. I also understand if I'm with another woman, I understand their bodies better. I can speak to male partners about what I need with confidence. But the thing is, my pleasure is my own. There is no fear that my partner leave me or break up with me, that I'll never experience pleasure like I did with them again. Like, it is my own. It's something I share and I gift to other people, but it's my own. Nobody is giving me my pleasure. I'm sharing it with people. And I think that is such a powerful place to
Yes.
exist from. And I don't think that's something that is gender specific. I really think this is a human thing, right? Sex doesn't need to be a thing we barter. Like, I will give you sex. And it was in the past. Like, let's be
Yeah.
honest, right? The reality is our history in America specifically was that in exchange for a home, financial security, food, women were with men. Became wives. They gave men sex. They gave men children. That was an exchange. It was a deal that was struck for our
It's
survival.
it still exists. I know plenty of women that do it. If I let him fuck me, he'll take out the garbage or whatever it is. And it doesn't bother
Absolutely.
and it doesn't bother them. It's like it's totally fine with me.
Well, it's because it's not abnormal. And this is why
Right?
we should support sex workers, because honestly, all of us come from
We're
women
sex
who
workers.
were sex
We are.
workers. I mean, it's truly what the deal was. And there's no one that can deny that. If a woman didn't find a husband, she didn't have a way to serve. We got access to a bank account in the 70s. right?
Crazy. Yep.
I mean, I was a baby at that time. This is in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And that is a harmful dynamic to everyone. You hear men saying, if you want them to have sex with you, you got to have money, you got to have this. Look, I'm not going to argue that that's not our place of origin, right? But it sucks for you because it's not as satisfying as knowing she really wants you, right? So this is where the dynamic needs to change. And one of the things that helps is when we all become owners of our own pleasure, right? And it's something we share with each other, not something we're trying to talk each other into or out of or get from one another.
Yeah, I think the key here in all of this, what I'm hearing and what I think would really change how we look at things is looking at it as pleasure versus sex. That because sex becomes a thing, and sounds so much nicer too. It just don't you want pleasure, right?
Well, and one of the things that has ruined sex for me oftentimes, like I have had difficulty orgasming throughout my life for lots of different reasons, as a lot of women have. And when orgasm becomes the goal, and oftentimes within sex, as our limited definition of it exists, the goal is orgasm, it makes sex work because now I got to work for an orgasm. I got to work to give you an orgasm. And that takes effort. And I can tell you, to all the men listening, I will admit, I've had moments where I've had a lot of compassion for you when I am like in the giver position, if you will, thrusting away, trying to get her to orgasm. And I am like, oh my God, my arm is numb. You know, it's a lot of work. It's a work. And likewise for her, you know, obviously I've been on the other end where I'm like, you know, being traded and petted, and it starts to hurt and I'm tired and I don't even care about the orgasm, but it's the goal and that's work. It's not pleasure. And when we take it and we stop thinking about sex equals in orgasm done, and we start looking at like intimacy and pleasure, and we let go of all that stuff and just enjoy being with each other and making each other feel good in ways that we were told we weren't supposed to, that's good sex.
Yeah.
That's good sex. And inevitably, at some point, orgasm is going to follow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. I'm going to wrap here because that was so beautiful. I have 3 questions I asked, but before I do that, I just want to, is there anything else you want to add to this conversation? I didn't even go through my question list because there's so much good stuff. I don't even need them.
Well, I would just say this. If you're in a heterosexual relationship, because this has been more of a heterosexual conversation, instead of just focusing on why is she unhappy, look at why is everyone unhappy, right? Learn how to take it from work to like play and pleasure together. And understand you have a lot working against you from a societal standpoint, and you together need to make a decision that you're no longer going to accept that. If you listen to Manosphere podcasters and you're a guy and you're listening to the trash they're teaching you, understand that's hurting you and stop, right? Stop looking at a woman through that scope. Understand you deserve more than that. You deserve more than that, right? And for women, you have to decide you don't care about the shame, that you're going to buck the system and say, all right, you can think whatever you want about me, but I'm going to go chase pleasure, learn about it, teach myself, feel it, fill my life with as much pleasure as possible, and then share that with someone who is going to meet me in this place of mutual respect and care and want and desire, right? So
I love it. I love it. That's great. That's really very, very well said. This was great. Where can people find you, Annette?
yeah, so my podcast is on all of the podcast outlets. So iHeartRadio, Spotify, whatever you listen to podcasts on, you're going to be able to find me. It's at Talk Sex with Annette. You can go over to YouTube and then you can see the podcast there, which is often useful because there are people that demonstrate things, so on and so forth. And you can find me on YouTube at Talk Sex with Annette. My website is talksexwithanette.com, and I am offering how-to videos, audio-guided self-pleasure meditations, and more on OnlyFans at Talk Sex with Annette there too.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on, and I love this topic. I think it's so important.
Thank you.